Season 1 2023 has come to an end for our Chicago White Sox. They finished 73-89 on the year, a very just not great record, but also not the worst in the division, as the Detroit Tigers and the Kansas City Royals both were worse than us. The Royals particularly bad with 115 losses on the 2023 campaign. Take a look at some of the wildcard teams in the American League. Unfortunately, the Orioles do end up missing out in the playoffs 4 games back, while the Rangers, the Angels, and the Yankees are the wildcard team. And then the National League, just a brutal end to the season for the Atlanta Braves. They were under 500 at the deadline. They looked completely out of it, went on a huge run, stormed back, end up missing out with a same record as the Mets, who do make it, but losing out in a tiebreaker to them. So the Mets get in, they do not. And then meanwhile, the San Francisco Giants were the top team at the deadline in the wild card in the National League, and they finished the year under 500 and 5 games out of the wild card. So take a quick look at the playoff bracket. That's what it looks like before any games are played. We'll check back in with this a little bit later on in the episode. So let's hop into some stat recap here for our White Sox ball club. The best bat on the ball club this year was Eloy Jimenez, the DH, by far the best bat, an 845 OPS with 29 doubles and 30 home runs. For Eloy, 6th most hits in the American League. Great year on a bad team. Nothing really more to say to it than that. We move things on to Andrew Benintendi. The contract we are stuck with, putting up numbers that I would basically expect for the entire duration of this contract. He is a guy who's going to hit for probably a high average, not get on base very much, not hit for a ton of power. You know, like a 760 OPS is basically what I would expect his peak to be, really. Unless he really just tears things up. But 729 OPS is, sounds about right. Decent average, like I said, doesn't get on base. And we also have Andrew Vaughn, the first baseman with no pop, a 733 OPS for him and 13 home runs. Guy's a singles hitter, plays no defense, has a strong arm, has no idea where it's going, can't play great defense. We're playing him at second base as of late because we just have a ton of first basemen on the roster, and it doesn't really matter how good our defense is while we're trying to be bad. But yeah, not exactly the ideal player. Yoan Moncada ended the season on fire, but overall, not a great year for him. Barely 700 OPS, 17 home runs for him. We've also got Gavin Sheets, who also finished the year on fire, but was so bad for most of the season that his OPS is still under 700. Luis Robert Jr., very unfortunate year for him. He got hurt a couple times, little minor injury stints, just wasn't doing that great. And then just as he started trying to swing it a bit more, just as he was getting into the groove, it seemed, he tears his Achilles, and he's out for the rest of the season. Jake Berger, we know about him. The Big Whopper is not very good at the one thing that he does. He has horrible defense, horrible plate discipline, does not hit for average. We already have Eloy Jimenez on the team, and he is much better at the whole plate discipline and hitting for average thing. So Jake Berger just doesn't really add much to the team, and just overall did not have a great season in 2023. I mean, what's bad when we're looking at Sebi Zavala and we're like, not a bad year. Serviceable catcher, OPS, low 700s, not the worst, could be worse. But then to round things up with the hitters, we've got Victor Reyes, the spark plug on this 2023 roster. Aside from Eloy, honestly, he might be the highlight of the season here in Season 1. Just a very fun player, high contact guy, has the good drag bunt, has a strong arm, has some speed to his game. Is he going to be on the next good White Sox team that actually makes runs in the playoffs? I would say no. But in the meantime, he could definitely be a guy who comes in and is just like a fun, interesting guy on these bad White Sox teams we are planning on having here. And taking a look at the pitching side of things, there's Dylan Cease, who, as we know, was bad most of the season, just did not have the greatest year. Fortunately, he did start to turn things around towards the end of the year, actually got his ERA down to an extremely low 4, a 4.05, and then he has a mid-4 FIP as well. Michael Kopech, he was fine, nothing more, nothing less. Very similar season stats-wise to Dylan Cease, except his was pretty much just fine the whole year. It wasn't like he was bad and then came back down to earth. He was just okay the whole season. Sean Burke, as we know, started off hot, then kind of got fine, and then finished the season not great. ERA up into the 5s, on a cold streak. The magic may have ran out for the Terrapin. And then some of the relievers, we've got Gregory Santos, who, in my opinion, is probably the most exciting reliever on this team. Doesn't really strike at anybody, but he doesn't give up the long ball either, and he also limits walks. Throws a hard sinker slider mix mainly. Only 23 years old, B potential, so definitely an interesting player to have. Garrett Crochet has similar ratings to him as when it comes to overall potential, but overall a much different player. He's a guy who strikes people out and then also walks a ton of guys. I think they're both the same age and same potential. But the thing about relievers is I view relievers as completely disposable. They are players that if they're having a good season for you and you're not a team that's going to make a run for the playoffs, or even if you're a borderline team, you trade the relievers. You always trade the relievers. So even though Santos and Crochet are both guys who are 23 years old, going to be 24 heading into next season, if they have just career years, I would not look past trading them at the deadline. Then we've also got Colin Holderman. He sucked. I was not impressed with what he was for us in-game or in the sim. While Michael Rucker was similarly bad with stats, but I liked how he just pitched more in-game, and I also just like his ratings more than Holderman, so if we stick with one of these guys next season, it's probably going to be Michael Rucker. And then if we take a look around the league at some of the stats, Mike Trout led the American League with 55 big flies on the season, also had an 11.1 WAR. Just an absolutely absurd season from the Millville Meteor, as he also leads leads the American League in home runs and WAR. And then we have Jacob deGrom, who led the American League in pitchers with a solid 2 WAR higher than the second place pitcher in Shane McClanahan. On the National League side of things, Trey Turner put together a fantastic speed contact season, 200 plus hits and 63 doubles on the year for the Phillies shortstop. Trace Thompson fell off a bit. He did not finish towards the top for home runs. Still enough to be in the top 10, but he only had 36 as cold streak to end the year for the Dodgers outfielder. Bryce Harper, highest WAR in the National League for him. And then Max Fried, Tony Gonsolin, Logan Webb, Spencer Strider all had about the same WAR atop the National League pitchers. The NL MVP is Matt Olson because, of course, home run go Burr. Tony Gonsolin is the Cy Young winner. Corbin Carroll gets Rookie of the Year honors. And then on the American League side of things, it's, of course, Mike Trout winning MVP, and, of course, Jacob deGrom winning Cy Young. While the Rookie of the Year is Cleveland's Gavin Williams, one of their starting pitchers. And then speaking of the Cleveland Guardians, as you take a look at the post-World Series playoff bracket here, the Cleveland Guardians are your 2023 World Series champions. They take it in 7 games over the San Diego Padres. The MVP of the World Series was the outfielder Steven Kwan. The postseason MVP overall in the American League was MJ Melendez, the man they picked up from the Royals at the trade deadline. Ended up playing a huge role in their World Series victory. And then they also, on the National League side of things, Xander Bogaerts was the postseason MVP for the Padres. Now let's actually shift into the offseason here. First things up, the retirements. I mean, who cares? There wasn't really any notable ones. The only one that was even worth showing was Robinson Cano. Goes into the Hall of Fame. I mean, who cares? It's the Hall of Fame in MLB The Show. I don't care about the Hall of Fame in real life. I especially don't care about the Hall of Fame in this game. When it comes to the staff on our team, we had to replace both of our hitting coach, our first base coach, and our third base coach. And then we also fired Ethan Katz as our pitching coach because his ratings were just terrible. He didn't have a single plus in anything. It's just like, why are you here? Oh, that's right, you're friends with Giolito. That's why you're here. Okay. So we ended up having to replace all those guys. And then we let Pedro stick around as the manager for one more year because he just had 1 year left in his deal. And there's no point in just firing him when we're not exactly trying to compete anyways. But now Mel McCormick is the new hitting coach here in Chicago. Edmund Moser is the new pitching coach. And then the base coaches are Kyle Hudson and Sam Van Dyke. So before we actually jump into the moves we made here in the offseason, just a quick rundown of some contracts that we currently have on this team and what we could look for here in the next couple seasons of if these guys are going to stay or if these guys are gone. What I'm thinking with some of these guys who are not immediate, like obvious trade candidates. So starting things off, we have Andrew Benintendi, who is the highest paid player on the team. Can't really move off that deal at the moment, so he's here for the foreseeable future. Maybe we try to look to trade him once there's like 2 years left in the deal, depending on where we are as a team. But as of right now, Benintendi is not somebody we can really move. Moncada, though, only has this upcoming year and then 1 more year left of team control after that. So he is actually somebody that we are definitely going to be looking to trade here. Probably not this offseason, but maybe at the deadline, maybe next offseason. But Moncada is not a guy we are looking at here long term. Aaron Bummer, same sort of thing. He signed for 3 more seasons for whatever reason as a mediocre left-handed reliever. Only around $3 million each season, though, so definitely still a tradable contract. Jake Berger, he's probably an immediate gone this season. We're going to be looking to trade him here in the offseason. Gavin Sheets is probably the first baseman I like the most out of these 3 first baseman types we have in him, Berger, and Vaughn. And that's mainly just because he's not the absolute worst defensively, and he actually has some pop to his game. It's not the most ideal that he takes a huge dip against left-handed pitching, but overall, I don't really care too much about platooning. I will definitely platoon a guy if I need to. But if we keep any of those 3 guys, I would say that Sheets is probably the one we are most likely to keep. But even then, definitely more so leaning to getting rid of him at some point. You know, if he has a good season this year, we could definitely look to trade him at the deadline. And then Andrew Vaughn only has 3 more years of team control. Horrible defense, no pop to his game. You are not a first baseman with that skill set, sir. I mean, you're just not. You're a contact hitting guy who can't play defense. So he's another guy where it's like, if he starts to put together some decent numbers, we're going to be looking to trade him at some point. And the thing that's good about trading Sheets and Vaughn is that they are guys who are going to have a decent amount of trade value. So we're not going to be we're not going to be just trading them for like fill-in starters throughout the system. We could possibly get some real solid prospects in return for those guys who are more so aligned with the plan of when we're going to be good with their ages as opposed to Vaughn and Sheets. Although Vaughn's not that old, but he's a guy who came up really early, so he still doesn't have the most team control. But then as far as the re-signs here in the offseason, the first one we did was Lucas Giolito. We offered him the qualifying offer, or gave him the QO, I should say. He accepted it, so we are going to treat 2024 for him like we were just going to treat 2023. He is a guy that we are going to hope pitches well, and then we're going to trade him at the deadline if he doesn't pitch well, or if he does pitch well. So, Giolito's gone at the deadline. Victor Reyes, we also re-signed him, of course, on a $950,000 1-year deal, so he's back in our outfield. Clint Frazier, however, will not be re-signed, so he will not be returning to the 2024 team. And then we also have Dylan Cease, who's an interesting case. Only has 2 more years of team control, including this upcoming season. We could theoretically get him for cheaper on his contract since he just came off a bad season, at least by his standards. And just looking around at the team signings, 2027 seems to be the year that the main guys that we can't really move off of or don't really want to move off of right now are signed through. Benintendi is signed through 2027, Robert is signed through 2027, and then Jimenez is 2026. And Robert and Cease are guys that I do envision for sure, or at least, maybe not for sure, but they are guys who I could see being on the next good White Sox team. But also their contracts are not going to be something to where they are totally awful to where if we do want to trade one of those guys, we can. They're still definitely movable contracts. So that leads me to, in what Cease actually gets, a 4-year, $69 million deal that is 16.6 per. That is definitely still a tradable tradable number. I mean, I'm pretty sure that was around the money that Lance Lynn was getting, and we just traded him no problem. So if Cease ends up being on the next good White Sox team, that's fantastic. If he ends up getting us a big return of prospects at some point, that is also fantastic. But essentially, that deal just put him on the same timeline as the other guys that were on the fence about trading, and then bought out his last 2 years of team control, and then also the first 2 years of free agency. While Michael Kopech is on the same timeline as Cease was before he signed the deal. He has this upcoming year and then 1 more year left of team control. But he's a guy who I'm not as high on, so Kopech's probably a guy that we are going to trade at some point. But now let's actually get into what we did here in free agency. First things first, we went out and got ourselves a platoon at shortstop. Paul DeJong is going to sign a 1-year, $2.6 million deal to play shortstop against right-handed pitching for us. Maybe we can get some magic from him and then flip him at the deadline for something minor. That's basically the plan with pretty much anybody we sign at free agency at this point of our rebuild. Sam Haggerty, he is the one who's going to be playing shortstop against left-handed pitching. Really solid splits against lefties. Did pretty decent with the Mariners last season in limited time. Good defensively too. Definitely good enough to play shortstop. So that's pretty much the reasoning why we're giving him the deal, the platoon with DeJong. And then also he's pretty good super utility guy too, so he could fill in defensively against right-handed pitching if we ever need that. We also went out and signed a couple different relievers. Jordan Holloway, a hard-throwing sinker-slider right-hander, 27 years old, solid hit per 9 rating, definitely an interesting guy to have around. And then we also signed Cody Stashak, who is a big sweeping slider pitcher, 99 break, limits walks pretty well, South Jersey native. They're both in the organization now. And then just a little quick break on what we did, and let's check in on him with the signing that everybody is interested in. What did Ohtani do? What did Ohtani do this free agency? Here's my genuine reaction. Oh, that's great. That's just fantastic. Shohei Ohtani. And there you have it. Shohei Ohtani is now in the AL Central, member of the Minnesota Twins. The Twins are now going to be loaded with him. Cleveland just won the World Series. This is not the real-life AL Central, folks. But then moving back over to what we did in free agency, we also brought on another first baseman type player in Bobby Dahlbeck as a reclamation project. And bringing in another first baseman, you know that Jake Burger is gone here later in the episode. And you may be asking, what's the difference between Bobby D and Burger? He's better defensively. I trust him to be able to play third base and second base much more than I trust Burger to even be able to play first base. And he is also a guy that we could potentially flip at the trade deadline if he puts up good numbers for us. And then the last guy we picked up here in free agency is starting pitcher Luke Weaver. 1-year, $5.2 million deal for him. He is 100% being signed to flip at the deadline. He's a guy who was available late into the free agency period. Nobody was giving him any offers, so I was like, why not? We'll give him a deal and he'll come over and we'll flip him at the deadline. He was actually pretty solid for Cincinnati last season, had a 2 WAR for them. No idea why they didn't flip him because they were not good, but that is definitely the plan for him on our team this season. And then around the league, just a couple ones that they actually notified me of that I noticed. Josh Hader to Seattle for a 5-year deal. Jack Flaherty actually goes to Baltimore, real life playing out like this happened. Or this playing out for like real life. I believe this was actually recorded before the trade deadline, so I'm not sure the exact timeline. But anyways, it's the same thing that happened in real life. He ends up on the Orioles. Tyler Mahle goes to the Philadelphia Phillies. And then Austin Nola goes to San Francisco on a 6-year deal. And then Julio Urias goes to San Francisco on a 5-year deal. And that gets my mind going. San Francisco just pushed a ton of pitchers down the depth chart. Sean Jelly, welcome to the organization. Burger is a team-controllable power first base bat. San Francisco's first baseman is Ramon Urias. Wilmer Flores, deep potential, 32 years old, not a long-term guy. And then Sean Jelly is a 26-year-old right-handed starter with a ton of team control. 6'11". We are cornering the market on just absurdly tall pitchers between him and Noah Schultz, who's down in our system as well. He is going to get a shot in the rotation at some point this season, but if that doesn't work for him long-term, we can absolutely look to move him to the bullpen, maybe dock down his stamina, bump up his velo and his hit and his per 9 ratings a little bit, and see if we can turn him into like a super long extension sort of reliever guy. And then taking a look at the Rule 5 draft here, we did actually have to add a couple guys to our 40-man roster, the first being Matt Foster, who is coming back from injury this season, and then Jonathan Cannon, a prospect starter who you saw highlighted in the AA game in the minor league update video. Probably won't make the team to start the season, but he's got a very, very strong chance to be on the 2024 Sox at some point. And then we had the 8th overall pick in the Rule 5 draft. We ended up taking Michael Hellman with that pick. He is a super utility man on the Minnesota Twins organization, was playing in St. Paul last season. Has some decent contact, really good defensively, has some speed to his game. I like the potential of him as a player who could be something for us. So we are going to take him in the Rule 5, and he's going to play all over for us. And then taking a look at the draft lottery odds, we had the 8th best odds at the number 1 overall pick, and unsurprisingly, we end up with the 8th overall pick. There were a couple movers towards the top of the list, but overall, nothing too crazy. But now let's take a look at what our 2024 Chicago White Sox roster is going to look like. And first things up, Luis Robert is a player who is not going to be back immediately for us. As we know, he tore his Achilles late into season 1, and it just didn't feel right for me for him to just be back like 5 months after he tore his Achilles and just be magically back in spring training. So I gave him a manual injury. He is basically going to be out for like a year, so he'll be back like around the trade deadline-ish. But anyways, moving on, taking a look at the rotation here. 1 to 5, it is Dylan Cease, Lucas Giolito, Michael Kopech, Luke Weaver, and then Sean Burke gets the shot just because I felt like he earned another opportunity here. And then the bullpen is Cody Stashak, Garrett Crochet, Michael Rucker, Aaron Bummer, Matt Foster, Gregory Santos, and Kendall Graveman closing things out. Lined up against right-handed pitching, Reyes in center, Benintendi in left, Vaughn at second, Jimenez at DH, Sheets at first, Moncada at third, Colas in right field, Zavala catching, and DeYoung at shortstop. And then at left-handed pitching, it's Reyes in right, Benintendi in left, Vaughn at second, Jimenez at DH, Dahlbeck at first. I ended up swapping Vaughn and Dahlbeck pretty much like 20 seconds after recording this because it hit me like immediately like, duh, he's better defensively, so he should probably be playing second base. And then we've got Haggerty at short, Moncada at third, Perez catching, and Hellman playing center field. The bench is mainly just platoon guys, so depending on if it's righty or lefty, it's just guys who are playing against, if they're playing against lefties, they're on the bench against righties and so on. But the one guy who is there, a super utility guy, going to be getting a lot of time in different spots, is Nick Gordon. Somehow didn't record him signing, but he just has a 1-year deal, so he's another guy who maybe he has a good season, maybe we flip the deadline, just another guy to have as like a late 20s stopgap sort of player. But that will wrap things up here for the off-season video. Next episode, we will kick off the 2024 campaign here with the White Sox against the Oakland A's, as they'll be starting their season in Oakland. So with that being said, that's going to wrap things up here. I've been your host, Jerseyborn, and I'm saying, down goes Anderson!